Only because I love my son so much.
What do you want to talk about today?
I don't have anything more to talk about. I'm all talked out.
No, come on.
I want to talk about my bird collection.
Okay, we can spend a minute or two doing that.
In my...
Why, what's with birds? Why did you start collecting birds in the first place?
Well, I was with I think one of my sisters, or both of my sisters maybe, we had been going shopping, and we were looking at, little, in the china department and the crystal department, and I saw this porcelain bird, and I think it's the yellow one. I have to look to make sure.
Keep going.
Is it too warm for you?
No, I'm just turning it off.
No, don't turn it off.
I just want it to go off so we don't have the noise.
You turn it down.
Yeah. Go ahead.
And I thought they were, the birds were so pretty. And I've always liked birds, although I'm not into birding. I did go birding in the Bahamas after we went for Tamara's graduation.
So when you were a kid, did you collect anything?
No, not really. I don't think so.
So birds, this is the only kind of thing you've ever collected?
Well, now I'm collecting bookmarks.
You're collecting bookmarks?
I have a lot of them.
Do you go to like Barnes and Noble?
No. I don't buy any, but I have at times gotten bookmarks, and I read a lot of books. I have 4 going right at the moment, 4 books, and I don't like to fold down the pages. And in fact, I just started volunteering at the Beverly Hills. The fan is going to stay on, Kenny.
Yeah, just for a little while.
The fan stays on. I started volunteering at the Beverly Hills Public Library bookstore, used book room, and they had a holiday lunch that I couldn't go to because I think I had a doctor appointment, and the president of the Beverly Hills Friends of the Beverly Hills Public Library, which runs the bookshop, gave me this bookmark for.
Oh, it's got an S on it.
I know, for a holiday card.
So you haven't used it yet?
I just got it.
It looks like it goes over the corner of the page.
The corner of the page. But it just so happened that one day I noticed when I was packing up all my stuff, that I had a lot of bookmarks, so I put them in a little container.
So now you're collecting bookmarks.
But they're not on display. Then I bought, but when I was young, I didn't really have anything. I don't think I had a collection of anything.
Did you have a lot of possessions as a kid?
No, not really.
Do you remember anything in particular that?
I had roller skates. I don't know if they were mine or they came from my sister.
The kind that strap onto your shoes.
Yeah, and you had a key to tighten.
Mm-hmm.
And you wore the key around your neck.
So that you could take them off later. What other kind of things did you have growing up? Your family had just one car because your mom didn't drive.
Right. And we went out to dinner once a week, sometimes on a Sunday night, to Zweig's, Z-W-E-I-G-S, which was a cafeteria. It was kosher.
What would you have?
I don't remember.
Do you remember what your parents would have, or
No.
your sisters? But you remember that you went there, so why does that stick out to you?
I don't know, because we didn't go out to dinner very much.
But that was a regular thing, roughly once a week?
Almost. Not always. Depended if my father came home to take us.
Was your dad home regularly for dinner?
sometimes late and eat with us. He worked on Sunday, he worked on Saturday, he worked. It wasn't a very happy childhood, but I came out okay, I think.
Would your sisters share that same assessment?
I don't think right now they would be able to share that assessment.
It's not what I meant.
Yeah, I mean, my sister Eunice was very pretty, and she went to modeling school, Patricia Stevens Modeling School, and they paid tuition for her to go to this modeling school. But no one said to me, or to even, I mean, Anita went to college, and Anita went away. She went to DePaul University for 1 year, which is a Catholic university in Chicago, as a day student. And then for a summer and a whole year, she was able to go to the University of Illinois in Champaign, Illinois, or Champaign-Urbana, and they paid for her to go because they wanted her to meet a husband. And she met a husband. That's where she met him, right at the beginning.
But growing up,
and she used to. And can you imagine this? They had special cases where you put your laundry in it, and you sent your laundry home to do. And then from school, you mailed it.
You mailed your laundry home?
Yes.
And then they mailed it. And who would do it at home? Your parents? Your mom?
My mother. We had Margie.
Oh, right. Let's talk about Margie.
Margie was very interesting. Margie came to work for my mother and father when I was 9 months old. We lived on Hamlin Avenue, 410 South, and Margie was the maid. And she lived in...
How old was she at that time when she started working?
I think when she started working, she was 18 or 19. She was an orphan. She didn't have any parents. And I have no idea. She was from Joliet, Illinois, which is a few hours from Chicago, known for having a big prison there. And I don't know how they got her, how she came
that's interesting.
to work there. I would assume that she was listed in an employment agency, or maybe someone else had a maid who also came from that area. But as far as I know, she never had any friends in Chicago. But I was a baby, and when I was 3 years old, we moved to Van Buren Street to a big apartment that had 2 bathrooms called double plumbing. That was the big thing. And a 3-story brick building in Chicago on Van Buren Street, 4056. And that's when I started going to kindergarten, and I realized, Margie was always home. I mean, my mother was home, but my mother started going into my father's business to help at that time.
Right.
So, and Margie would go out. She had the day off on Sunday. And she had Thursday night off.
So what would she do?
She would go, I think she would go to there was a ballroom, I think. I don't know. I don't know. But maybe she had a boyfriend. I don't think she had a boyfriend. She never married. She lived with my mother until my mother died. My mother died in 1992. And then she lived in senior housing in Northbrook, Illinois. She would help Eunice. She lived when my mother was alone, she lived with my mother, and they would go over to Eunice's house a lot, and they would help Eunice. You know, Eunice had people over.
Did you or your siblings have any sense of how your mom's death impacted Margie?
Well, she actually got a better life after my mother died because she was younger than my mother. I will say if my mother was 27, let's say, when Anita was born, so my mother was 34 when I was born.
So she was 15 or more years younger.
So she was with my mother all the time after my father died. And
which was in 1964.
Yes, and January 1964. And she went to live in the senior building, and I used to talk to her at least once a week, if not more often. And the senior building, which, as I said, was in Northbrook, so it was very close to where Eunice lived. And she went on outings with people in the senior building.
She never learned how to drive herself.
No. They would go to a lunch and theater, places, not mainstream theater, but places in the outlying area that would put on a musical or something, and they'd come have lunch, and it was all arranged by the senior center.
And at what point did you and your sisters start to realize, oh, Margie's still here, hasn't gotten married? When did that? Because I remember growing up, it never occurred to me. It was always Margie. Margie was always around.
I don't know. I don't know. I mean, to me, she was a good person, but I don't know. I know she gave up. I don't know that she gave up her life for working with my parents, but she never left. She could have left.
It's very interesting.
She could. I'm sure the situation. She was paid, and she got free room and board, and she ended up with an estate of sorts.
And she was continued to be paid until your mother died.
Yes,
all that time.
Yes, all that time. She was paid, and I don't know what happened after my mother died. Who paid her rent?
I'm sure that Uncle Lenny took care of everything.
I don't know. I really don't know. I mean, she had money, and I don't know.
And from your mom's perspective, what was her attitude? All of her kids, I'm thinking there's a couple transitions here, right? One is, by 1964, you and your siblings are all out of the house already.
By 1964, I left.
Right.
I left in 1955.
Right. So your dad dies, everybody's out of the house. Your mom should be able to take care of herself.
No, my mother couldn't take care of herself.
In the 1960s?
No, because my mother was uneducated. And it was like Margie was her eyes and she had eyes. But Margie was just, I don't know what my mother would have done. I don't know that my mother could have lived by herself because she never did. After after Margie came, she
But
never
your mom
did.
came across an ocean by herself,
Yes,
right?
she did. My mother was always scared, and you know, my mother never wanted to talk about what she went through, but in reading about things of that in those years, because she came to the U.S. in about 1926. She was born in 1906. It was the time of the pogrom, and I read that they came into the houses and raped, and you know, you don't know what they didn't kill her, and she left a sick mother, and I think when she left, her father was already dead, and she had 9 siblings, and I think only 1 younger, maybe 2 younger, I don't know. She never wanted to talk about it. And we were wrong for not insisting that she talk about it in later years. And I mean, that's what I regret. One thing I regret is that we never wrote down any of these things factually, or even not factually, even from my mother's mouth.
And I guess she never shared any of that with your dad either.
I don't
know.
I don't know. I think my father was not, I mean, I don't think he was a good husband.
How did they meet?
They might have been fixed up. They might have. I don't even know that. But you know, she got here, she, you know, met him, she got married. When I was a little girl, I used to want to sit down and teach her how to write.
Teach your mom how to write?
Yes. And she wasn't, you know, it wasn't like in more recent years when they had English as a second language and things like that. But they sure had, I'm sure they had classes and things for people who did not. There were too many immigrants coming in that time.
Right, of course.
2 million immigrants were, you know, from 1880s till the 1920s.
Yeah.
And she was in Chicago, where there were sure a lot of them, and Jewish. And
what about your dad? Did he ever talk? Do you know anything about his life before he came to the United States?
No. Natalie probably knows more that she got from some of the families.
Right, but it was never talked about.
No. You know, I could be angry about a lot of things. I'm not angry about a lot of things. I mean, part of things are my own fault too, that I didn't pursue things. I mean, I wanted to go to college, but if I didn't want to go to college, no one would have said you should go to college. You know, that's just the way it was. No one told me to get A's. In those days, they were called E's or S's. I don't know. No one told me. I wanted to do well in school, but I wanted to have, no one said to me I should have braces on my teeth. Eunice wanted braces on her teeth. It was too expensive. $400 at that time was too expensive. But they could have found the money, you know. When I had my back surgery, they didn't have hospitalization insurance. I was 14. They could have.
How did they pay for that? Do you know?
They paid it was, you know, the hospital room was $28 a day. I think he was doing better. He had a business. I was 14.
It was also experimental surgery. Did the surgeon?
It wasn't experimental surgery.
I thought it still was.
He had done 7 surgeries. like
Sounds
that.
pretty early, but so he didn't give you a break, do you know?
I don't know what the fee was. I don't remember that. The hospital, all I know is that my mother would take sometimes 2 buses
Right.
to visit me in the hospital. I was in the hospital a long time.
And when your mom died, you never found any documentation from any of your medical care? Nothing like that at all?
Nothing. If they found it, Eunice was the prime caregiver as far as overseeing my mother's care and everything. And when my mother moved from my last place that I lived, which was in the Austin area of Chicago, 5005 West Adams, which is a building they owned. And whatever was there, or was at my father's business as well, someone took care of, and I don't know anything about it. I wasn't living here.
When your dad died, he was working and had the business.
Yeah.
What happened?
They closed up the business, but mostly at that.
It wasn't an asset they could sell?
No, well, I think at that time he really wasn't doing the glass business anymore. When he died, he was taking care of apartment buildings. He had one of the men who worked with him for years, Brooks, his name was.
You told me that the glass business declined. You once told me because people stopped putting glass on their desks, and then they started having curved glass in cars.
Right, and also windows in cars that were automatic windows, and in the side windows.
Yeah.
It used to be you roll the window down
Right.
with a handle, and they didn't do that. And once it became curved glass, and once it became automatic windows, business declined, and
Let's talk about your move to Chicago.
No, I think I'm finished for today.
No, you're not finished.
I'm finished.
One more question. So, it's not going to be anything you don't want to answer. I'm curious because Dad's family, except for Aunt Johnny, Dad's family is all in LA, and he moves with you all the way to Chicago. I think that's interesting.
Okay, well, what happened is I got a job right after we got married, working for the Federation, Jewish Relations Community.
Yeah, you told me that story last month. That was really interesting about the donation.
And when your father started working, I was supporting the 2 of us. He got a little bit of money from the being in the service as a veteran, going to school. That stopped if he stopped going to school. Mm-hmm. He got a job, and I really didn't like my job. And after a few months of him working, I did something not very smart. I quit my job. Figured, I'll go get another job. Well, it wasn't easy. There was a recession going on. It wasn't easy to get a job, and I worked for a temporary agency, and I would go out here and there, and that wasn't very satisfying. And my father said, if you want to move to Chicago, I'll sell you an apartment building. And so he looked for a job in Chicago and got a nice job in the suburb of Winnetka, very, very affluent suburb, and near where Eunice was already living, I want to say, in Wilmette. And he got a job, and we moved. And we put our furniture in storage.
In LA?
In LA, because we thought if we don't like it, we'll come home. And we got a furnished apartment, 1 bedroom on the north side, not too far from Winnetka. And your poor father had never been in the snow, lived in the snow. And one day, he parked on a parking lot behind our building, outdoors. And one day, the car wouldn't start. And he's waiting, calls the auto club, and he's waiting outside for the auto club. And they finally came after an hour, and he got sick. He had a cold and a cough. Anyway, that was one of the first things that happened. It was in the winter. We moved there in the summer, before that happened.
And so you drove from LA to Chicago.
We drove.
In what car?
Well, we had a 54 Chevrolet, and that was 57. No, that was 58.
Mm-hmm.
In 58.
And did you stop along the way? You couldn't drive the whole time straight through.
No, we stopped.
Did you make a trip out of it and see things?
Well, not really, but we did have to stop in Ogallala, Nebraska, because the muffler went out. And so I don't know if that was on the way or on the way back. And after a year, meanwhile in LA, before we moved, maybe even 6 months before we moved, I started working at CBS Radio on Sunset Boulevard, 6151 Sunset Boulevard. I don't remember these addresses. And I worked, I don't remember what I did, but I met some really nice people. And when I left, the guy in charge of employment there, his last name was Orloff. I don't know what his first name was. He said he would write me a recommendation that his brother worked at CBS in Chicago. This was CBS in LA.
Yeah, right.
CBS Radio, not TV. And when I went to Chicago, I was hired as a secretary to the head of the sales, radio sales, in Chicago as a secretary. And so we moved, and I took the subway into the city every single day and took the subway back home every single day. And
that must have been a 30 or 40 minute ride.
Yeah, probably, maybe a little less. Subway was, I don't know. Maybe, I guess it was. And we lived a block from the subway station. It was an L. I think it was up high at that time. And one time in the snow, it was so icy that I had to walk so slowly going the one block. It was, anyway, we were talking about that. Who was I talking about that to? Your son, Eli, on the phone.
Oh, because
about
he lives
sleet.
in the winter now.
Talking about sleet. Anyway, and I got pregnant, and the baby was born. So we got an apartment in Skokie, and we sent for our furniture.
Oh, okay.
And we got a 2-bedroom apartment in Skokie. And it was very nice, close across from a synagogue, and very fast. And along the way, when we lived there, we got a second car. We got a Plymouth. I want to say it was a 60 Plymouth, and it had these big fins, 2 doors.
So you bought it new?
We bought a new car, yeah. Well, he was doing well.
I was going to say, you probably felt like you had hit the big time.
Well, I worked and he worked. We still had the old car.
Right.
We kept 2 cars. And he and I stopped working. When I got pregnant.
So you buy a new car, but then you cut your income.
Well, I didn't stop working right away, but I stopped. I guess we felt we could do it. I mean, because he got this apartment building, he was collecting rents, and it was a lot of cash rent. It was a rooming house, it was a slum.
Right. And when you moved back to LA, was that after the school year had ended?
Yeah, the baby died in baby was born at the end of April. He died, and we had gone we had gone looking at houses, and luckily we didn't buy a house. In those days you could buy a house for $25,000 in the suburbs of Chicago. And so we said, let's move back to LA. It was a very bad time. And
in your lives, you mean?
Yes. And
how did you stay married after that?
Well, there was never any talk of not staying married. I mean, it was a difficult time, but you recover. You recover. And I started working I started working for a temporary agency, and I got a job at New Trier High School. At that time there were 2 or 3 New Trier high schools. That one was in Niles Township High School. It wasn't Niles. Okay, maybe it wasn't New Trier. I can't remember now. Maybe it was Niles Township High School. Anyway, in the area of where we lived, and I met I worked as a secretary, school secretary, did whatever had to be done. And I worked full-time. It was a full-time job, but I was working for a temporary agency. Mm-hmm. But they kept calling me back because they needed help. And Alan Budnick always had been in touch, and he said to your father that there was a job opening at Culver City High School in English and Social Studies. And why doesn't he come in? I don't know. We said we might come back. I don't remember exactly how that happened, but he
had to come out specifically to interview.
He came out, made an appointment, came out specifically to interview, and came back. Not with the job or not without the job. They didn't hire him on the spot.
Yeah.
But then at some point, they called him and told him that he had the job, and he gave notice in Winnetka, and they liked him in Winnetka. Mm-hmm. But they understood, that we were going through a lot, and so we went back. My family, my mother and father were very, upset, but we went back. And
Antonita must have been happy for you to come back to LA.
Yeah, that was nice. We didn't know where we were going to live, and someone, I don't know who told us, or maybe it was even Alan Budnick, that this area, La Brea and Jefferson, had all these apartments, and we went looking, and we got a 2-bedroom apartment. I don't remember how much we paid.
Is that where I was born?
Yeah, and that's where you were born in. And when we got back here, I went back to school. See, after we got married and I went to work, I also went to night school. So for 2 years, I had accumulated, some more units. And when I came back, when I went over to LA State, they said in a year, I could take classes, and then in 6 months, or after the first semester, I could apply for student teaching my second semester, which is what I did. So I got pregnant, because you were born in July, so I must have gotten pregnant in November.
So you never had a full-time teaching job because you graduated just before I was born.
But I didn't even have my credential. I had to go to school after I graduated, because you were born in the summer, and I had to take one class, and I would drive to the east side to LA State College, now Cal State University in LA, to take one class one night a week, and I left your father to feed you and
Did that
put you
work
to
out
bed.
okay?
Yeah. Well, you know, you were born July 12th, and you were a couple months old. You know, in today's day, you don't give a baby food at 2 months old. All they do is have milk, nurse, or formula. But you know, in those days, 60 some years ago, at 6 weeks old, you got cereal, you know. So that was about what you would eat, cereal in a bottle, I think, in the morning and at night, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And things worked out, but I got my credential.
Great.
But it was easier to get a credential in those days. I mean, I'm just saying,
Mm-hmm.
you didn't need the extra year. I just I just had 4 years of college, and my major was elementary education.
Mm-hmm.
And that semester when I went back to school, I took art in the elementary school, music in the elementary school,
Right.
you know, social studies for they had all these classes, and but I couldn't fit everything in because the second semester you do student teaching, and you take a student teaching class, which is 11 units, and I couldn't fit another class in. It's a lot of work. Student teaching is a lot of work.
I know.
You did it.
Yeah.
That's the end of the session.